August 9th, 1944. Mortain, France. Fog coils over the hills like a living thing. Oberstleutnant Kurt Böhmer wipes his binoculars with a rag and scans the tree line again. His ears are ringing from the last artillery salvo. Somewhere down the ridge, the smell of diesel and pine needles mixes with cordite and sweat. Then something moves. A shadow darts just above the treetops. Not a bird. Not a reconnaissance balloon. It's a plane. And it's far too low. Böhmer squints. It's American. Fast, twin engines. That's impossible, he mutters. The flak crew beside him hesitates. One of them panics, swings the barrel up. Too late. The aircraft skims the ridge like it's glued to the earth. It disappears behind a knoll, then bursts up again, strafing an artillery column in the valley. A mechanic shouts, "Herr Oberst!" "He's flying under our fire arc." Böhmer doesn't reply. His hands tighten around the binoculars. The pilot is weaving through hills, hugging the terrain, so close he's kicking up dust from the trees. "That's not a sanctioned flight path," one officer stammers. "That's madness." But deep inside, Böhmer feels something colder than fear. It's calculation. Whoever's flying that plane isn't improvising. He's executing. And he hasn't come alone. Above them, the sky looks quiet. But something's wrong, deeply wrong. Because in just a few hours, the entire artillery line Böhmer commands will cease to exist. And it all starts with one pilot, breaking every rule in the book. Just 5 days earlier, German morale had surged. August 4th, 1944. The counterattack at Mortain had a name, Operation Lüttich. High Command sold it as a turning point. 5 panzer divisions, plus artillery, would slam through American lines, cut off Patton's advance, and reverse the Allied tide. Böhmer had walked the ridge personally that morning. Trees were stripped. Camo nets stretched over artillery bunkers. His men manned 80 mm flak guns, dug in, sighted, perfect. Their barrels covered the valley like a steel curtain. Every calculation said the Americans would advance through predictable paths, roads, open fields, bridges. And when they did, they'd walk into a firestorm. Even the Luftwaffe promised support. What little fuel remained had been diverted to the west. "We can still win here," one officer told Böhmer, over black coffee and stale bread. Normandy is not yet lost. They believed it. The artillery would hold. Then the tanks would crush. No one talked about what was happening elsewhere. Falaise closing, the Red Ball Express pushing inland, fuel drums offloaded with terrifying speed. They believed American power relied on altitude and armor. They didn't expect the sky to bend. They didn't expect the ground to attack. That morning, as Böhmer watched a pair of Focke-Wulfs lumber overhead, he turned to his aide and smiled. "Let the Americans come," he said. "Our guns will speak." But just 72 hours later, those same guns would be silent. Not out of ammunition, but out of existence. Because deep inside the American lines, someone was flying a different kind of mission. A mission that hadn't been approved. A mission that hadn't been tried. And if it worked, it would change the doctrine of air warfare forever. On the American side, the tension was mounting. At a makeshift airstrip near Rennes, Captain John S. Walmsley Jr. climbed into the cockpit of his A-26 Invader. The paint was chipped. The sun was brutal. He had studied the terrain so long he could see the valleys even with his eyes closed. Napa the Earth flying wasn't in the manual. It wasn't legal. It was suicide, unless you did it perfectly. His co-pilot glanced over and asked, "You sure you want to try this, Jack?" Walmsley didn't answer at first. He adjusted the throttle. The engines rumbled like distant thunder. Then he said quietly, "They think we'll come from the clouds." He looked east, toward Mortain, toward the ridge, toward the artillery waiting to kill. "Let's come from the grass." By the third day of Operation Lüttich, The German rhythm had begun to slip. Cloud cover rolled in like a woolen blanket, muting sound, blurring lines. Spotters couldn't see. Rangefinders twitched. Radio lines crackled with static. The thick Norman hedgerows, once an ally for camouflage, now choked visibility. And something strange had started to happen. Reports trickled in, fragments at first. An artillery post outside Le Neuve-Bourg reported a flash of silver whipping through the valley at treetop level. Then silence. Another battery farther south claimed it was strafed by an American fighter that rose from the river like a ghost. No sound until it was on top of them. No time to aim. No pattern. The usual Luftwaffe reports showed no bombers in the area. No large-scale raids. Nothing expected. Oberfeldwebel Marcus Drexler, a seasoned radio operator stationed near a communications van, tried to piece it together. Something felt off. At 600, he heard the first garbled distress call. Then another. Both were brief, cut off mid-sentence. The artillery unit at La Chapelle had gone dark. Drexler approached his superior. "Herr Hauptmann, there's something wrong with these signals." "Interference," the officer replied without looking up. "Allied planes are probably jamming us again." "But they're flying low," Drexler insisted. "Not high, like usual." "I think they're not," the man snapped. "No pilot would risk that. Not at that altitude. Not with flak lines." Drexler fell silent. He didn't know Captain Walmsley's name. He didn't know about the twin A-26s that had just crossed into occupied airspace using a technique most thought suicidal. He didn't know that some American pilots had begun training themselves to fly by the veins of the earth instead of the compass. But in his gut, he felt something shift. Not defeat. Not yet. But a pattern was breaking. And he knew enough to be afraid of what came next. The first strike came before sunrise. From the edge of the Mortagne Ridge, gun crews saw nothing, heard nothing, until the trees across the valley erupted in flame. 2 German field pieces were gone before the flak gunners even reached their stations. Captain Walmsley's A-26 had come in low, under the radar, behind the hills, like a silver shadow riding the roots of the earth. He didn't fly straight, he snaked. Every ridge was cover. Every river bend a mask. His co-pilot called out distances. 30 feet above ground, 20. Then up, just enough to clear a hedgerow. And down again. They hit hard and vanished. Within minutes, 2 more American aircraft followed his path, pounding artillery nests, command posts, supply trucks. German spotters struggled to understand. "They're not flying in formation," a lieutenant stammered into a field radio. "They're not flying by altitude. They're folding into the terrain." By midday, Burmer stood over the smoking remains of his second flak battery. He listened as a surviving corporal described the attack. "They flew like insects," the man said, "beneath the trees. Around them. Not over. Insects. They never climbed. They crawled." Burmer clenched his fists. What are they doing? There was no doctrine for this. No Luftwaffe manual had ever envisioned an enemy turning terrain into an ally. The Americans weren't dominating the sky. They were ignoring it, redefining it. That night, he requested additional anti-air batteries. The reply came back, denied. High Command still believed the air war belonged to them. But Burmer was starting to see the cracks. Captain Walmsley, meanwhile, reviewed his gun camera footage in silence. 3 artillery pieces destroyed. 1 munitions truck exploded. Trees blasted apart like matchsticks. No losses. He circled 1 frame, his A-26 threading between 2 ridgelines at 160 miles per hour. This was never in the manual, but this worked. He turned to his crew. "We go again at dawn." The intercepted message came through late in the day. Garbled, but unmistakable. American pilots were deviating from approved flight paths. Command had not authorized low-level ground sweeps. No direct orders had been issued, yet the attacks continued. Burmer read the decoded transmission twice. Then a third time, he handed it back without a word. The flak commander beside him asked, if it wasn't ordered, why are they doing it? Burmer didn't answer. He looked out toward the valley where the smoke still rose from another destroyed battery. In the German army, deviation was punished. Creativity, discouraged. War was discipline, orders, hierarchy. But here was an American pilot, unauthorized, choosing to fly under the guns, risk everything, and succeeding. He thought back to their training manuals. German air doctrine was a science, rigid. American pilots, they once said, were sloppy, undisciplined, too reliant on machines. But now, that sloppiness was dismantling his entire sector. He whispered, more to himself than anyone, what kind of country allows this? Across the valley, Walmsley's squadron refueled from a convoy that had driven all night. Fuel trucks, engineers, mechanics, radio techs, spare turrets. Refrigerated food, every piece fit, every delay covered. He chewed a protein bar and wiped the sweat from his brow. His plane was already being rearmed. His crew chief laughed. You fly like a cowboy, sir. Walmsley didn't laugh. We're not cowboys. We're scalpel blades. Another crew was taping coordinates to the instrument panel. No maps needed. They'd memorized the terrain. They were flying by memory now, by instinct. Back at German command, Burmer held a list of artillery units that had gone dark in the last 48 hours. He tried to find a pattern. There wasn't one. That was the pattern. The next morning, another American A-26 came in lower than ever. It struck just 300 meters from Burmer's own command post. No sirens, no warning. Just the sudden roar of engines. Then silence. The truth came wrapped in numbers. Captured supply logs from abandoned American positions revealed what Burmer had feared, but could barely believe. Each aircraft, like Walmsley's, wasn't just a plane. It was a node in a vast machine. Every sortie backed by 15 ground crewmen, 4 mechanics, 2 intelligence officers, and a truckload of standardized parts. A damaged invader could be rearmed, refueled, and back in the air within 12 hours. A destroyed one replaced in 24. The numbers made no sense until they did. Germany had engineers, elite ones, but they built masterpieces, not machines for war. Each artillery gun a custom job. Each panzer a legend. But once broken, they stayed broken. America wasn't building weapons. It was building a system to keep weapons in motion. Burmer held a page from an intercepted Stars and Stripes issue. It described a new repair depot built in less than 2 weeks, capable of servicing 50 aircraft a day. He traced the lines with his finger. It wasn't just planes coming at them. It was fuel trucks that never stopped, roads that seemed to rebuild overnight, spare parts that fit every model, pilots trained to improvise, then rewarded for doing so. He turned to his aide. They've removed uncertainty, he said quietly. They don't wait for orders. They don't fear mistakes, because the system absorbs it all. His aide said nothing. At that moment, Captain Walmsley was walking the edge of his airstrip, listening to the wind. He wasn't a genius. He wasn't a maverick. He was replaceable. And that was the point. Behind him, an engine started. Another A-26, ready to fly, same as his. If he went down, someone else would finish the mission. Not in weeks, in minutes. Walmsley climbed into the cockpit. They weren't flying solo anymore. They were part of a doctrine, and it was just beginning. The end didn't come with a single explosion. It came with silence. By August 13th, 5 days after Walmsley's first nap of the Earth strike, The entire German artillery line west of Mortain had vanished, not withdrawn, not repositioned, erased. Smoke hung over cratered fields. Camouflage nets dangled like torn flags. Flak crews wandered in shock, those who survived. In a report stamped Vertraulich, Oberstleutnant Kurt Böhmer wrote only one line: "We trained to follow orders. They trained to break them." That same week, Captain John S. Walmsley Jr. received informal word from his superior. His tactics were now being reviewed, not for reprimand, but replication. Within 48 hours, other squadrons began flying low-level attack drills. By September, it had a name: terrain masking, and it spread like wildfire through the 9th Air Force. Walmsley's footage was shown in briefing rooms across Europe, and the strikes kept coming. A supply bridge near Argentan, destroyed at dawn by a pilot flying 10 feet off the water. A panzer column near Domfront, ambushed in a valley with no air warning. An artillery depot hidden beneath orchard trees, blown apart by a plane that never rose above the canopy. Each time the pattern repeated: speed, surprise, precision. Then, nothing. Böhmer stopped requesting new guns. There was no point. Even when replacements came, they vanished within a day. The crews were demoralized. New flak batteries arrived with instructions, but no hope. One sergeant began refusing to man his gun. "What's the point?" he said. "We can't even see them coming." In late September, Böhmer wrote his final personal note to command. "I no longer believe we are outgunned. I believe we are outthought. Their pilots are not rogue. They are proof of something deeper, something we never understood." He never received a reply. By the time Mortain fell, he had abandoned his post, retreating on foot through the shattered hedgerows, alone. Years later, in a post-war diary published privately, he added a single reflection: "They didn't win because of what they built. They won because they knew how to build it again, and again, and again." In war, numbers lie until they don't. By the end of August 1944, the Americans had laid more than 200 miles of flexible fuel pipelines across Western Europe. One of them ran less than 20 kilometers from Mortain. It fed tank columns, aircraft depots, even mobile bakeries. Böhmer's artillery ran on diesel, carried by horse-drawn wagons, across muddy, cratered roads. Delays stacked, guns stalled, trucks overheated. Repairs became impossible without custom parts. Each American A-26, identical engines, interchangeable wheels, radios pre-tuned to ground teams. Walmsley never had to wait for a part. He'd land, report damage. Within the hour, a mechanic had a replacement, pulled from one of hundreds of identical crates stacked in canvas tents, each labeled with bold, stenciled letters: USAAF, Field Module, Type A-26. This was not just logistics. This was designed for war. The Americans built for replaceability. Germans built for perfection. And perfection broke. On one afternoon patrol, Walmsley passed a disabled German self-propelled gun, camouflaged under broken branches. Its treads were mangled. 2 dead horses lay nearby. A single thrown tread had turned it from weapon to monument. Back at base, he asked an intel officer how long it would take to get that machine operational again. The man smirked. "Longer than it'll take us to bury it." In a command hut not far from the wreckage, Böhmer studied a diagram captured from an American quartermaster truck. It was color-coded. Fuel, food, ammo, parts, each had a delivery interval, each backed by a system of redundancy. If one truck failed, 2 more arrived. If one depot burned, supplies rerouted. Germany had plans. America had systems. And that changed everything. Germany built hierarchy. America built trust. At Luftwaffe command schools, initiative was dangerous. Orders were sacred. Disobedience, even successful, meant punishment. The idea of a pilot flying below radar without written clearance defied every protocol. But Captain Walmsley, he'd done it and been decorated. His squadron commander sent a letter up the chain, praising tactical brilliance born of field necessity. Within weeks, Nap of the Earth training entered official doctrine. No hearings, no delay. In Germany, such behavior would have meant court-martial. In America, it meant do it again. Boehmer, once proud of German precision, now watched in silence as American tactics mutated faster than his officers could understand. Each failed airstrike didn't result in scolding. It resulted in revision. Every A-26 carried a camera. Every mission turned into feedback. Every strike refined the next. Not by generals, but by sergeants, gunners, crew chiefs. Walmsley once told his crew, "If you find a better way to kill artillery, tell me." His flight engineer did. They flew lower the next day. By early September, German units had begun abandoning fixed positions entirely. The terrain itself was now a threat. Trees didn't hide. They echoed American engine sounds. Boehmer's aide handed him a captured field manual. Inside was a line underlined in pencil. Commanders must empower field improvisation within safe boundaries. He laughed. The phrase would never appear in a German manual, because America was not just bombing Germany. It was outthinking it. In every hangar, on every truck, in every sweaty airfield, young men with grease under their nails were reprogramming the rules of war. Not in ivory towers on gravel runways. It wasn't about the sky anymore. In 6 weeks, Walmsley's tactics spread across 5 combat wings. Over 900 German artillery positions were neutralized, not by high-altitude bombers, but by aircraft that flew so low their shadows blended with the trees. At the height of Operation Lüttich, American sortie rates surged to 4 times that of the Luftwaffe. Fuel delivery intervals tightened to every 15 minutes on key routes. Spare parts airdropped if needed. Field repairs averaged 12 hours per aircraft. German crews couldn't keep up. They couldn't even catch up. One captured Wehrmacht general told interrogators, "We aimed for the sky, but your planes came from the earth." Another added bitterly, "They lost a plane. We lost a doctrine." By late September, every American A-26 was flying terrain masking runs by default. The maneuver that began as a reckless act had become policy, then doctrine, then standard operating procedure. Back in Normandy, a junior American crew chief leaned against a supply truck and scribbled in his journal. Funny thing about that pilot, Walmsley. He broke the rules, and now we're building new ones in his name. His squadron had renamed their practice strip the Trenches, a nod to how low their aircraft flew. And Walmsley? He never gave a speech, never wrote a memoir, but his name began to show up in training manuals, footnotes, procedures, protocols. The very things he had once ignored now carried his signature. Boehmer never returned to artillery command. He was reassigned to a rear logistics unit, where the only fire he saw came from burning maps. He kept one picture from the war, a blurry reconnaissance photo of a field south of Mortain, where a lone A-26 had been caught mid-dive, moments before the frame cut to black. Below the photo, he scribbled, "One pilot broke the line. The system broke the rest." The grass still grows on the Mortain Ridge, green and thick, fed by decades of rain and silence. Every summer, the hedgerows bloom again, hiding the scars. Trees stretch over fields once shaken by fire. And on a quiet afternoon in 1984, a man in his 60s walked those fields alone. He wore a faded bomber jacket, American, leather cracked, collar worn. In one hand, a folded map. In the other, nothing. A local boy asked who he was. The man smiled. "I knew a pilot who flew through here," he said. "Low, real low." He pointed toward the far tree line. Germans said, "He flew so low, they couldn't aim their guns down far enough to shoot him." The boy laughed. "That sounds like a story." The man looked out across the fields, eyes distant. It was. He paused. "But it was also the day we stopped fighting like gentlemen and started fighting like we meant to win." He turned to leave. As he did, a gust of wind kicked up, rustling the leaves overhead. And for a moment, just a flicker, the trees seemed to part, as if something invisible still moved between them. Not a plane, not a shadow, but an idea. An idea that flew so low, so fast, so unreasonably close to the ground, that it rewrote everything the enemy thought they understood about war.